Hey everybody, this is Cepeda. I am the director of ABAskills and the co-director of One-to-One Learning Works. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about how to teach prepositions, pronouns, and opposites. So these are some tough concepts to teach because it's not just putting picture cards on the table and telling your learner, touch this, touch that. I mean, these are like concepts that they have to figure out based on basically nothing, right? It's just completely abstract. If I say, touch my shirt, touch your pants, I mean, most of our learners hear shirt, pants, and because those are the salient parts of the SD. So who knows what they're going to be attending to when you start saying touch your pants, right? You're going to try to use some kind of voice inflection. And that could cause some kind of vocal imitation error. Anyway, before we get into all of that, I just want to say that if you're watching this on Facebook Live, great, welcome. If you are watching this to get CEUs, there are going to be 3 keywords during the presentation. And I want you to write those keywords down. And then I want you to send them in an email to info@abaskills.com. And then we can send your certificate and your PowerPoint and any of the handouts that I'm going to review with you tonight. So again, you're going to write down the 3 keywords, email them to info@abaskills.com, and please include your name. And if you would like your certificate number on your certificate, please include that as well. So let's get back to prepositions, pronouns, and opposites. But just before we actually do that, I'm going to give you your first keyword, which is transatlantic. Okay, transatlantic. Write that down. Transatlantic. That's your first keyword. Okay, so prepositions, pronouns, and opposites, all abstract things, but I'm hoping that by the time we're done tonight, you're going to have some better ideas about how you can teach these to your learners. Now, I often get asked, can I teach these to my 18-year-old, to my 15-year-old, to my 3-year-old? So the short answer is, you know your learner better than anybody. So, I mean, I am a huge proponent of focusing on language. So I was trained at the Lovas Institute under Scott Wright and Linda Wright. And I would say probably 90% of that training was all about language, whether it be vocal or whether it be through some kind of augmentative communication device. Which I want to say that even though we're going to talk about a lot of language teaching and training tonight, if your child uses an augmentative communication device, they should be responding to the programs that we're talking about using their device. Okay, if you say like, whose mouse is this? They should go to their device and they should type the buttons, hit the buttons, your mouse, right? So, or if you're going to ask them, which one is big, they should go to their device and say the flashlight is big. So you have to make sure that all of those responses are programmed into your learner's device. You have to make sure that your learner is fast and fluent with using their device. And if they are not, then I strongly suggest you working on some rate building. And if you are not familiar with rate building, I strongly recommend that you Google Rick Kubina. That's Kubina. Rick's a brilliant guy. He has a couple of amazing books, and he has lots of information out there and research for you to check out about rate building to get your learner going faster. And it's not only on their communication device, it's for anything. Just rate building, reducing latency is obviously critical for our kids with developmental differences. Okay, So anyway, so we're going to talk a lot about language, and I just wanted to say that again, I like to focus on language. Easily, the kids that I work with, 90+% of their entire program is language because I'm a strong believer that regardless of the mode of communication, if your learner becomes an effective communicator, they are going to be way ahead of the game, way ahead of the curve, and less likely to engage in challenging behavior because they know how to tell you what they need. Hopefully, they would get to the level where they can tell you what's wrong, what hurts, what they don't like. But even if they don't, being an effective communicator, getting your basic wants and needs met, and being able to use some descriptive language, engage in a few conversational exchange can make all the difference in the world to your learner, regardless of ability, regardless of their age, and regardless of their behavioral repertoire right now. Okay, anyway, enough of that. Let's get going. So, where am I getting all of this programming from that I'm going to talk to you about tonight? So here are some of my favorite resources, okay? A work in progress, excuse me, Ron Leaf and John McCacken. Teaching Developmentally Disabled Children, the Me Book by Dr. Lovas. I know it's 100 years old, but if you haven't read it, read it. What's wrong with you? Read it. All right, it's a piece of history, and I think you'll be surprised at what you find in there. That it's still very similar to a lot of the things that some people are doing today. Obviously, the Sundberg and Partington manual, because we all need a variety of tools in our toolbox. So it's not just one way of doing things for kids, right? You can't just have your favorite way of teaching stuff and assume that your learner can't do something because they're not getting it. If your learner is not getting something, it just means that you stink at teaching it. And I've said that to parents many, many times. You know, if a parent says, "Oh, why isn't Junior understanding prepositions?" Well, I say, well, because I'm obviously really crappy at teaching prepositions to your kid. And then I just try to figure out 5, 10, 15 other ways that it can be taught. See, like that's the fun of everything. So you have a work in progress, you have the Me Book, you have the Sundberg and Partington manual, and this is another programming manual by Dr. Lovas that you probably don't have, but again, I think that you should. There's a lot of good information in there. This book called The Autistic Child was written by Dr. Lovas way back before he even was thinking. Well, I don't know if he was thinking about doing his groundbreaking seminal research, but it's like his thoughts and some experiments and some data from some of the kids that he was working with, you know, a long time ago. And it is really interesting because a lot of it is kind of it can be a little stream of consciousness, but I think it's truly fascinating reading. And I think that everybody who is focused on language based teaching for children with autism should own and read that book multiple times. Of course, we have Science and Human Behavior, and of course about behaviorism, which is the philosophy of our field. And that's actually a very cool book. So let's just get right into prepositions. So I know that when I consult with teams or other consultants who use the ABAskills or the BCaBA, and I talk about prepositions, and then they mentioned a multitude of prerequisite skills that that they want their learner to master before introducing prepositions. I just have this discussion with them and say, you know, in the Lovas curriculum, prepositions comes kind of early, right? It comes labels, colors, shapes, prepositions, pronouns. Kind of like a basic sequence there. So I'm going to explain how all that gets put together. But I mean, my advice is don't wait to teach prepositions if you are using one of these other resources. Because really, when you think about it, if you have something like a flashlight, so what is it? A flashlight. What color is it? It's black. Well, what shape is it? It's a circle. Okay, well, where is the flashlight? It's on the shelf. It's in your hand. It's under the table. It's next to the chair. So now you can talk about the flashlight as well as what's it for? And, where did you get it? Things like that. But I like that sequence. Labeling, colors, shapes, prepositions, pronouns. And there's lots of challenges with teaching prepositions for some of our kids. But again, it's like one of their first abstract programs, because when you actually ask a learner what color, they're probably going to say flashlight, because that's just what they've been saying. They've been looking at an object and saying what it is. Now you're showing them the same object that you spent a very long time teaching them to label in some specific way. And now you're asking them to talk about it in some other specific way. And then you have to put those two different kinds of responses in random rotation or interspersal and fix whatever discrimination errors come up. So we'll talk about fixing some discrimination errors later, but I just want you to keep in mind that literally you can do labels, colors, shapes, prepositions, pronouns. And what's interesting is when you get to once receptive pronouns are mastered and generalized, you can start opposites, which we're going to talk about later, how all of that is connected. So here are some prerequisite skills to prepositions. Touch noun, and what is it? So there's your objects. Touch color, and what color, right? Touch shape, and what shape? Then you could do touch noun versus touch color, and what is it versus what color? And touch noun versus touch shape versus touch color, and what is it versus what color versus what shape, right? So when you're forcing those discriminations, you know that your learner is really cued into the critical elements of what you're saying. Because think about the cluster of programming that's coming next, which is going to be WH discrimination. Now, if your learner is having challenges with what is it versus what color versus what shape is it, then saying what is it, where is it, how is it, why is it, when is it, is really going to be a challenge. And this will be a good indicator not only of how well that your learner can actually acquire these difficult discriminations, but also when you are figuring out how to get your learner to make these difficult discriminations, you are going to have a set of skills specific to that learner that you know that you can employ when you go on to harder programming like WH discrimination, which includes categorization and same and different plus Y, etc. That level of programming. Okay, so first, we have receptive picture labels, right? So we're going to talk about the prerequisite skills. So let's go through the prerequisite skills leading up to prepositions. And I'm trying to show you everything that I think that you probably want to do. You shouldn't have to for a variety of reasons, but the things that you probably want to do before you start teaching prepositions. So you have your receptive picture labels, where your SD is touch the noun. Now, field sizes of 3 to 20. Now, when you're doing discrimination training, if you do discrimination training, you're probably going to start with a field size of 1, because obviously you have to condition whatever you are trying to teach as an SD, because otherwise the child does not know that when they see that thing on the table that it signals that reinforcement's available, right? But then you immediately want to go to a field size of 3 to eliminate any kind of 50-50 selection, and also to make sure that you're setting yourself up as the instructor for more complex discriminations. And then you have to increase the field sizes, even with really young kids. If you are like working with young children, keep increasing the field size, because just remember, there is nothing in a 3-item linear path in real life maybe unless you're at the supermarket, right? But even then, there's still, so tons of stuff is in a linear path that are on the shelves, but really what's happening is there's just stuff like everywhere. And then you want to go find, let's just say like you are a big fan of like Ruffles sour cream and onion potato chips. Sounds good right about now, doesn't it? But you have to go into the snack aisle, and now you have to scan the entire aisle and find that one bag that you went in there to find. So now think about your learner that you're trying to teach, and you have these three little blocky looking pictures or three objects on the table, and you're like, oh, touch the car. And then the kid touches the car, and you're like, yeah, well, that's good. It's a good place to start. But before you just start banging out multiple exemplar training and this and that and increasing the number of things that the kid can label, increase the field size. He does not have to know what everything is that's in the field. You just have to increase the field size. 3 items, 5 items, 7 items, 15 items, 20. Have 2 tables set up. Have the kid stand over there and say, go over there and touch the car. So now he actually has to remember it while he's ambulating across the room and looking at this big table full of like 20, 30 objects. I think you'll find that it's interesting that there's probably going to be some breakdown in your learner's ability to hold on to the information that they need in order to respond correctly as the field sizes increases, whether it's a field size of 5 or whether it's a field size of 20 where that breakdown occurs, I don't know. But isn't it interesting to try to figure that out and then continue to figure out how to fix that, so that looking at a lot of different things and holding on to the information to get one thing is now fixed. And so then that will have long-term benefits as the programming gets harder and harder and harder. Okay, so your stimuli can just be pictures of objects. Now I skipped the object labeling because just for the sake of expediency, really. But if you want to do receptive object labeling, that's fine. But if you're doing object labeling, I would try to minimize the amount of stuff that you're doing on the table, and instead, and now we're talking about, kids that have home-based programs or are school-based programs. And I know that everything is remote right now. So whomever is sitting next to that kid, this is what you're going to tell them. You're going to say, take Junior over there next to that shelf, point to that book and say, touch the book. And then you're going to bring him over there and you're going to say, touch the chair. And then you're going to pull him back about 3 feet and you're going to tell him, touch the book. And he's going to walk over to the shelf and touch the book. All right. So the things that are in the environment are way more important for that learner to label than a bunch of stuff that's on the table. Of course, I'm not saying don't do stuff on the table. I'm just saying that it's okay to get your program started on the table, but get the kid up and away from the table and into the real world doing the same skill so that it's functional as quickly as possible. And again, because when you're working field sizes 3 to 20, kid gets up and leaves the table, can't label anything. Why? Because the environment is completely overwhelming. Okay, next step, expressive picture labels. So from day one, please randomize the SD, the vocal component of the SD that you're using in expressive picture labels. You should not be repetitively saying, what's this? Or what is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? See how annoying that is? Let me do it 10 more times. What is it? What is it? So no, you say, hey, what is the blank? Tell me what this is. What's this? This is and your learner should be responding appropriately, because anything else you can think of that would signal to them that they're supposed to label the item, throw that in there too. Because instead of having to teach one specific SD, what's this? And then you have to generalize to all the other ones, just day one, throw them all out there, because why not? The worst case scenario is your learner Might make some discrimination errors, might get confused, I understand. So maybe then you scale back. Maybe you just do 2 or 3 instead of 5. But I like to start more and then scale back. I would rather give my learner the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be able to handle it than just say, well, we have to start with this one SD and everybody has to say exactly the same thing and everybody has to say it exactly the same way. What's this? But that's weird, okay? So again, when we're talking about language, you want your learner, I want my learner, and I hope you want your learner to talk the way we talk. And we don't say, sit in chair, what's this? Go over there. So we can stop doing that. So expressive picture labels. What is the blank? Tell me what this is. What's this? This is a blank. Okay, so then next, when you start expressive picture labels and your receptive picture label program is probably going to continue because you know that your learner needs 250, 300, 400 different labels. So that program is going to just continue. But when you get to a certain point, you can just introduce receptive colors. And you use the little color cards that come in like the language builder picture card kit, right? Those are fine to start with. But you also need other things. So initially, you'll do colors only. Then expand the field size with pictures of objects, right? Because using the pictures of the objects may also help with upcoming discriminations. All right, so right off the bat, you're being proactive with your programming and setting yourself up for success, which is going to help your learner be successful because you're already putting colors against objects, pictures of objects. So you're already teaching them to eliminate those pictures when you say touch red. Now you don't put a red car in the field, okay? That's what you have to be careful of. You can use pictures, just make sure that nothing else is red when you say touch red. If you say touch yellow, take the objects that have something yellow on them out of the field because you don't want them attending to that right now. They can be attending to it later. But you also need large field sizes, again, 3 to 20. So what are you going to do? Put like 15, 20 blank index cards on the table? I mean, you can if you want to take a super systematic approach. But again, give your learner the benefit of the doubt. Just say, you know what? I'm working with Johnny. I think he can do it. I'm going to put out these 15 things and I'm going to tell him to touch one thing and let's just see what happens. I'm going to show him what it is a couple times. I'm going to fade my prompts. I'm going to differentially reinforce and I'm going to shape up his ability to respond quickly and correctly in large field sizes and eliminate the things that he absolutely has to know are not the response because they look totally different. Right? So you're using pictures of objects, which may also help the upcoming discriminations, like I said. So you're stimulating the color cards, the language builder card set, and variations. So what do I mean by variations? Otherwise, I mean, obviously I'm talking about multiple exemplar training, but you can just take a crayon and just scribble on a 5x7 card. You can take a marker and scribble on a 5x7 card. You can take anything that you can make one color, a piece of chalk, anything, so that it's different, different, what's the right word? Gradients, levels of a color. Like there's all kinds of variations of red, but they're all red. So, one thing that I like to do sometimes is just to take my wife's paint swatches and I just cut them up and use them with our learner. Don't tell her. All right. But that's great too. Go to the paint store. There's 5 million paint swatches, or like one of these big box stores. There's 5 million paint swatches. Look, all the multiple exemplar training you could possibly want is right there for free. Go in there, grab it, and that's it. There you go. Cut it up, laminate it. You're all set with your color stimuli. And then again, expressive colors. What color? What color is it? This is the color, and they fill in the blank. Is this color? So that's obviously going to be for your learners that have already mastered yes and no. Tell me the color. So all of these variations in the SD, just do them. Throw them out there and start teaching them because one, it's much more natural. You're teaching loosely. You're using a variety of SDs, the generalizations built right into the teaching, you're differentially reinforcing, all the kids responding, and if you're using a transfer, a stimulus control procedure, then there's probably very low probability that your learner is going to be making lots of errors because you're going to say what color, and they're going to and they're going to respond correctly after the transfer. What color is it? They're going to respond correctly after the transfer. This is the color blank, and you teach it errorlessly. So why not throw it out there? So just from this one component, I just want you to think about that. Maybe pick a kid to do it with tomorrow. Like just say, you know what, let's just, I've been working with this kid for the last 6 months, a year, 2 years. I think he can handle being taught that, with multiple SDs for one object. What's the worst thing that happens? Just scale back, but who knows? Maybe he just gets it, and now you don't have to do all that programming for generalization, or you do less of it, right? Because it's built right into the teaching. Okay, as we make our way towards more prepositions, you do your receptive color of objects. Show the learner a picture of an object or the object itself, and just ask them what color. And they're going to tell you the name of the object, so just be prepared to do it errorlessly. And that is a teach one and probe for generalization program. So your child's ability to look at an object and make the discrimination, to look at it and not select the label when they hear what color, is something that is not only necessary, but I definitely think that they're going to be able to do. So initially, your objects are primarily one color. Then start using pictures of objects that are primarily one color. And so, there is a step where you show a kid an object or a picture that is multiple colors, and you say, what colors? We're not going to talk about that, though. But it is something that you can do with some kids. Okay, so now you go from your expressive colors to receptive shapes, right? So they've learned some colors, now they're going to learn some shapes. In receptive color of objects, you're going to go from receptive color of objects to receptive color versus the label. Okay, now you're going to start forcing some discriminations. So receptive color versus label. So the SDs are touch color versus touch label. Now, the stimuli that's in the field are pictures of items that the learner can label that are primarily one color, right? So you have your red car, you have an orange cup, you have a yellow ball. And you say, touch red, and they touch the car. Good. Then you mix the stuff around, you say, touch the car. They should touch the car. It shouldn't be that difficult, especially if you're doing it errorlessly, or if you're just prompting and fading your prompts, depending on the teaching procedure that you use. If anything, it will give you some insight right away into whether your learner is going to have latent responding, because some kids, they're so used to looking at some specific set of stimuli and responding in a specific way, but so now they see something that's familiar, but they're hearing something that's not so familiar, and some response latency occurs. And so it's your job now, it's our job to then make a note, Junior has some response latency. If this goes on for the next 3-4 sessions, I want to be aware of this, because I don't want to inadvertently shape up latency when there isn't any. Okay, so then we have receptive shapes, where, again, use the shape cards from the language builder, as well as variations for multiple exemplar training. Draw different shapes, get some multicolored construction paper, cut out a bunch of shapes that are a bunch of different sizes, and that all look kind of funky. Use the shapes from that purple shape sorter that it took you, 6 months to teach your learner to complete, free of all non-contextual vocalizations and motor movements. Take the shapes out of that and teach them in the receptive shapes program. Okay, and again, we're looking at field sizes of 3 to 20, okay? 3 to 20. So next, here are your prerequisite skills. Expressive colors goes to expressive color versus label. Receptive color versus label goes right into expressive color versus label, and your receptive shapes go into expressive shapes. So now expressive color versus label. What color versus what is it? Right now, when you first introduce that program, do not say what color is it versus what is it. You definitely want the instructions to sound as different as possible to help your learner make the discrimination, because they're looking at one thing and you're saying, what is it? Pen. What color? Gray. Well, okay, that's going to be a little bit challenging because, again, your learner's experience with this particular item is that they've labeled it 2,000 times. They've emitted some specific behavior in its presence, and they heard the sequence of words that evoked that particular behavior, and they contacted reinforcement for it. And now they have to do something different. And so even if you're trying to do things errorlessly, there is still going to be some discrimination errors. So just be prepared to fix those discrimination errors. So when you're running this, your stimuli are pictures of items that are primarily one color and variations, and maintain those two responses separately from this program at 90 to 100% to avoid or to at least minimize the discrimination error, the discrimination errors that are bound to occur in this program. Now, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but all of these discrimination errors that you're going to fix now are going to make teaching prepositions and pronouns and opposites a lot easier. In your expressive shapes program, again, lots of SDs. What shape? What shape is it? This is the shape blank. Is this a shape? Tell me the shape. So throw them all out there. Again, prompt fade, differentially reinforce, get your kids successful. They hear lots of different things. They're emitting some specific response when they hear lots of different things. And even if it takes a little bit longer than just teaching with the one SD, the long-term benefit is because we haven't even talked about conversational language training, which is not what we're talking about at all tonight. But everything that you're doing when you're doing this kind of stuff is setting a good foundation for your conversational language. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now a lot of stuff just happened, so let me just go back for a second. Okay, so let's look at this chart. So just look at expressive shapes and expressive color versus label. Now, here's what happens. Receptive shapes turns into receptive color versus label versus shape. Okay, let's go back. Look at expressive shapes. Expressive shapes goes into expressive color versus label versus shape, which comes after receptive color versus label versus shape, right? And it should be pretty self-explanatory. So touch red, touch car, touch rectangle, right? Because what shape is the car? The car probably looks more like a rectangle than anything. Or touch orange, touch ball, touch circle. So those are all the ways that the learner can be identifying the ball, the picture of a basketball. Okay, now let's go back again. Not that far. Here we go. Let's look at expressive color versus label. Let's follow this arrow down here. Expressive color versus label versus shape. What is it versus what color versus what shape? Okay. Again, discrimination training, fixing the discrimination errors, and making sure that you are building your own skill set related to that particular learner about how to fix discrimination errors, and so you can minimize them when you move on to the preposition programming. From receptive color versus label versus shape, then we follow that arrow down to receptive prepositions, okay? Which, interestingly enough, that once that's mastered, you can start your receptive opposites. But let's just go back for a second, okay? So we were at expressive color versus label. So we went here, expressive color versus label versus shape, which then I have this arrow out here to generalization, rate building, and retention probes. Because again, teaching one and probing for generalization is going to be critical. You should not have to have a list of items that your learner has been, let's just say, forcibly taught to make this discrimination. It's either they can make this discrimination or they can't. So when I teach this, randomize the object, because the object isn't the target. The discrimination of color versus label versus shape is the target. So what is it? What color? The next one, what is it? What color? What shape? Next one, what color? What is it? What shape? So you just, so that the learner understands that it's the variation in the language that they're supposed to be attending to, not so much looking at the object and just figuring out because they keep hearing what color, what label, what shape, what label, what color, what label, what shape, what color. But like this thing keeps like changing. But what they're showing me just keeps changing. It must be something about what they're saying that must indicate that there's some specific kind of response that I'm supposed to emit. So now I'm not saying never take one thing and force that discrimination. So when I say teach one and probe for generalization, take a set of items, run through the set, teach the discrimination. Once that set of items is close to mastery, get a whole new set of items and probe for generalization. Is your learner making that discrimination with 90 to 100% accuracy? If not, well, teach the new set, randomize that set with the old set, gather up a new set. Once the last set is close to mastery, probe for generalization again. So that's what I mean by teach one and probe for generalization. Not necessarily one item, but when you're teaching these discriminations, it could potentially be a set. Okay, so rate building. So we talked a little bit about that, because it's not only that you want the learner to make these discriminations, you want them to make the discriminations quickly. So there shouldn't be a lot of latent responding. And if there is, then you probably want to put some focus on that. And of course, you have your retention probes where you don't want to spend a lot of time doing maintenance. You just want to make sure that all this previously acquired stuff actually is maintained, which really shouldn't be such an issue, because if you notice, every single step along the way and each arrow along this route brings you to a program that absorbs the previous program and actually increases the level of complexity. So once you get here, you shouldn't really need to maintain all of this, okay? I'm just throwing that out there. So, but you can set up some retention probes. Okay. So now once we get to receptive color versus label versus shape, you can start your receptive prepositions. Okay, and then of course the receptive prepositions program starts with, then continues on to additional preposition programming. So let's see what some of that would actually look like. So here's the basic receptive prepositions program, and it's just the preposition only. So you're presenting the learner with some item, and there's something in the field, like you're handing them a block and there's a shoebox in the field, and you say put on top, and then they take the block and they put it on top. And that's how you focus on teaching the prepositions in this very basic format. And you want to target behind, in front of, under, next to, and both sides. I've actually seen teams where the little block or the little object only goes on one side of the referent, and then the learner, when they hear next to, only puts it there. And then we didn't discover this was, well, the team didn't discover this was an issue really until the until the expressive step, when one of the instructors put it on the other side of the box and said, where is the block? And the learner didn't know. Put it on the other side of the box, and they said, where is the block? The learner said next to, okay? Both sides of whatever object that you're using. In, on top, in back of, and beside. Okay, I know that beside is sometimes taught much like later, like beside, above, and below, like almost as like an additional SD, but I like to teach beside because I guess depending on where you live, that's the preferred way of using the term next to. Some parents just say beside. And even though I might say next to, someone else says beside. So it's just, and it's also good just for your kid to have some variation in the teaching. Just vary all the SDs. Behind, in front of, under, next to, in, on top, in back of, and beside. I strongly recommend that your data collection is trial by trial, because if you are in, if you like using a lot of probe data, cold probes, first class probes, that's fantastic. Probably not for this kind of programming, because I don't think it's going to be sensitive enough for you to know if your learner's making progress. Because it's one thing if your learner is getting a yes one day, a no the next day, a no the next day, or at the beginning of the session it's a yes, then a no, then a yes, then a no. That might not be enough information for you, because what's probably better is knowing the difference between 20% correct, and then 40% correct, and then 30% correct, and then 60% correct, and then 65, and then 70, and then 90, and then 100, etc. So when you're collecting that trial by trial data and displaying it as a percentage correct, that measurement, I feel, is much more sensitive to the progress that your learner is making, or lack thereof, than just yes, no kind of data collection. So we're talking a lot about discrimination training. So let me pull up my handy dandy discrimination training procedure, which I'm going to show you the most basic version of this first, I think. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So in prepositions, so let's just say you have on top is SD1 and behind is SD2. So you do SD1 in isolation, then SD2 in isolation, while maintaining step 1 at separate times. Then you do SD2 in the presence of SD1, which it kind of already is, but we're going to get to a little video where you're going to see more about what I'm talking about. Asking for SD2 only while maintaining step 1 at separate times. Then you're going to do SD1 in the presence of SD2, asking for SD1 only while maintaining step 3 at separate times. Then you're going to do SD1 versus SD2 in static positions, randomizing the target, and SD1 versus SD2 in random rotation of target and the position. So if you're looking at a shoebox, you're not randomizing the target, right? I'm sorry, you're not randomizing where the position is on or around the shoebox. But we're going to figure out how to make the teaching a little more salient in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so here's your basic discrimination training sequence. Now, let me just minimize this a little bit. If my mouse decides to do what I would like it to do. And this is the more formal write-up of discrimination training that if you're getting CEUs and you paid for the workshop tonight, then I'm going to be sending this to you. All right, because here's your discrimination training procedure that will help you figure out all of the errors that could potentially be happening as far as discrimination errors, whether it's the color versus shape versus object, or it's the prepositions, or it's the pronouns, because some kind of variation of this procedure is what you're going to need to figure out where the discrimination error is occurring and also how to fix it. Not going to take a lot of time to go through this because it's just like me just telling you that it's blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah isn't going to help you visualize it. Like I said, if you are getting CEUs, you will get this. And then, of course, if you use this discrimination training procedure and you get stuck, then feel free to email me and say, hey, Ray, I'm doing this with this kid. I'm doing this. I'm on step 3, and he keeps making this error and this and that. What am I supposed to do? Because maybe you need collapsing trials. Maybe you need expanding trials. Maybe you need some field replication. Maybe you need some other form or variation of this discrimination training procedure to fix whatever errors that your learner is engaging in. So, but your basic discrimination training is that 5-step sequence, right? or 6 steps. SD1 in isolation, SD2 in isolation, SD2 versus SD1. Then you're going to randomize SD2 and SD1 in a very systematic way, okay? So let's get to the next step, which would just be receptive prepositions, which is preposition plus location. Now, you're going to put preposition location, where the learner places the object in the correct location. But here's the thing: for the stimuli, you need one object in 2 locations, because that's the discrimination that's being made, is not only the preposition, but where it's going to go. So if the child's looking at a blue chair and a white chair, or better yet, a chair and a table, and you say, put on top of the chair, then the learner should obviously take the block or whatever object you're handing to them, walk over to the chair, put it on top of the chair, and then walk back over to you. Okay, so let me just make sure that I included something. Yes, I did. Okay, good. Let's just go back for a second. Okay, so now your next standard preposition program, which is receptive prepositions object plus preposition plus location, where you're going to say, put the object, preposition, the location. So now your stimuli are 2 objects and 2 locations, because you have to make these discriminations, right? Your learner has to make the discrimination, because it's not just handing him something and making them do something with it. It's like you have to discriminate the object, and you have to discriminate the preposition, and you have to discriminate where it goes. Now, one thing that I didn't include in this standard list are all of the expressive steps, because when we talk about the preposition expansion, I'm going to talk to you about a much more effective way, or at least that I found to be much more effective way, to expand prepositions and help your learner understand not only prepositions, but also the other language concepts that they are acquiring, because you're going to be presenting them all randomly, and they're going to be able to figure out exactly what you're saying, regardless of how long your SD is, which we're going to get to that. So then your next step is something that you're probably familiar with, which is when you tell the child to go preposition. Maybe you stand them in front of a chair or a desk, and you say, go under, go on top, go next to. That's pretty basic. And then the next step would be child locations with the preposition plus the location, go preposition location. But here's a different kind of preposition sequence. So the following expansion, it's a sequence that will allow you to systematically add other programming that your child is working on or mastered into this preposition program. And the sequence that I'm going to show you is outlined as receptive tasks, but the way that it works is, as your child masters steps receptively, you would go on to the next receptive step, and then you would target the previous step expressively. So the expressive step is always 1 step behind the receptive step. So for example, if step 3 is mastered receptively, you go on to receptive step 4, but then you start teaching step 3 expressively. Very, very simple. And please note that when you're collecting stimuli, there must be a correct and incorrect option for every term in the SD. Now, let's see if I have this all handy dandy. Here we go. So this is what I'm talking about. So here's your SD. So you're going to start with put preposition, 1 object, one referent item. So, but let's go on to step 2, because this is just to teach the preposition. I'm not really forcing any other discriminations other than the preposition, and of course the prepositions that I talked about that I want you to be teaching to your learner, and that they're going to need for higher level programming. But the next step is where the instructor presents the learner with a number of objects and 1 referent and says, put the object preposition. So now you have object and preposition. So, but here's the thing. If your example is like, put the car next to. So now you need 1 car, you need 1 other vehicle, you need something that is not a vehicle, like a car, a truck, and a cup. right? So those are just the things that they're going to select from, because now you're really creating the appropriate discriminations, right? Because it's not only like you're not saying put the car next to it and there's only a car. I mean, if it's only the car, then there's no chance for your learner to be wrong. It's like you want them to discriminate all of these words in your SD. Remember what we were talking about before? When like the first time you say like what is it versus what color, and the learner's just looking at you kind of blankly, or they're making discrimination errors, they're not sure what the relevant component of your SD is, they're not listening to like to the whole thing, they're just trying to pick out the key bit of information to help them respond correctly. See, so like this is a whole sequence of language training that should eliminate that. And it will help your learner make more complex discriminations, which again, at this early level is really critical because you have a lot of programming to go through. You have a lot of language to teach, and the discriminations don't get easier, they get increasingly more complex. And so fixing these discrimination errors before they happen, right, is really what you want to be doing. So then we go on to step 3, where the SD is going to be put the attribute object preposition. So what does that mean? So here's our example SD. Put the blue car under. So now you have your referent where they're going to put something under, because we haven't even talked about the location yet. We're only talking about making the discrimination of the object they're going to manipulate and the preposition. So now the stimuli you need a blue car. I said a blue truck, you need some other blue vehicle. You probably need a red car. You probably need a red truck, right? So all of these discriminations can be made. You need something else that's blue, that's not a vehicle, and something that's probably just innocuous, right? So this is the field size that I would have: a blue car, a blue truck, a red truck, a blue cup, and a yellow pencil. And you say, put the blue car under. So now the child selects the blue car because they're probably not going to select the blue truck. And hopefully they don't select the blue cup, right? Because if they're listening for only one key word in the SD, then they're going to make that error, right? They're going to make that mistake. So this is teaching them you have to listen to everything that I say, then look and evaluate the stimuli, and then select the right stimuli, and then place it in the appropriate location. Okay, so step 4. Now you're going to put the attribute, object, preposition, the location. For example, put the blue car behind the box. So your example stimuli might be a blue car, a blue truck, a red truck, a blur cup. Well, it's supposed to be blue. A blue cup. And your example stimuli in the field is probably going to be like a box and a bowl. Right? I mean, or you can do a field size of 3. You can just put three things out there, but at least 2. So now they have to discriminate: car, blue, the preposition, and the location. Hence, anything that's in parentheses has to have a correct and an incorrect response. That's what I'm talking about. Let's just go here. Let's skip down to step 7. So step 7 is a very complex SD. Put the attribute, object, preposition, the attribute, location. What does that mean? It means put the big red block in the little blue cup. So now you have to have every single word: big, red, block, little, blue, and cup. All of those words have to have correct and incorrect responses. So yes, it's very stimuli intensive, and you can't just keep using the same stuff like over and over and over again, because our kids figure out whatever pattern that we're using, or that when we're using the same stimuli for the same kind of programming, it inadvertently cues them into the kind of response that they're supposed to emit, right? At least that's been my experience. So as difficult it is as to collect stimuli, especially when you're doing remote learning and you have to do stuff online, or you're trying to get parents and other instructors who are actually in the home to collect stimuli. But it's critical that that stimuli be collected because we want all these discriminations to be made. Okay, so again, if you are getting CEUs, I'm going to send this to you. And then you can just read it, you can email me, you can ask questions, I'll help you figure out whatever errors that your learner is making. But it's really, I found this to be super helpful with kids of all ages and all abilities and vocal or communicating on a device. Because when they're listening to all of this, even if they're listening to this, even if they're going back up here, sometimes some of our learners only get this far. But you know what? Being able to listen to that, and then you think about your learner that you've been trying to teach complex instructions for a long time, multi-step instructions, and they just had a tremendous amount of difficulty. Interestingly, some of the kids that I've worked with, that I've done this, that had difficulty with complex instructions, after mastering some of the steps in this program, helped with some of that other programming. And I was very, very happy to see that. And I certainly wasn't expecting it, but it did happen. Okay. So that's just another preposition sequence. So aside from the standard sequence that I went through before, that's something that you can do that I think is really, really cool. And I think that it helps our learners so much to listen to every single word in the SD, evaluate the stimuli, take your time, get the answer correct, because what will happen is, or at least what should happen is, their responding should get a little bit faster and a little bit faster because they're hearing all of these words. It's going in there and they're figuring it out. I'd love to see that happen. Okay, so I mentioned something about making prepositions more salient. So let me just click here. And so, yes, that's me with a mustache and a beard. And so it gives you a chuckle, so go ahead and chuckle. But I just want you to watch how to make prepositions a little more salient. Let's see if this will. Okay, well, we shouldn't start at the end, right? We could. Okay, so we can skip the Charlie Brown music. So basically, let's just listen. And just what I wanted to say is that you're gonna hear me say that we're in Red Bank, New Jersey, which we're not anymore. So just heads up. I want to talk to you about prepositions. Sometimes hard, sometimes easy. I want to talk about doing it a little bit differently, because traditionally, the way that we teach prepositions is we show our learner a box. We hand them a cube and we say put on top, and then we prompt it, and we say put in front, and we prompt it, and made our prompts, and blah, 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 and all of that. So what are you going to do when that doesn't work? So here is the idea. So what I did was I grabbed a little Ziploc container with Velcro, have a cube with Velcro, and now I can make it a receptive language task with discrimination. Okay, so first, we're going to do SD1 in isolation, touch on top. Very good. Touch on top. Very good. Touch on top. Very, very good. Good. So we have on top in isolation. Next, I'll introduce in front in isolation. Touch in front. Very good. Touch in front. Nice work. Touch in front. Very good. That is in front. Excellent. So the next step will be to do S. Okay, well, I didn't want to do that. Okay, so one thing that I do want to point out. And all of that. So grab, I can make isolation. Is that it's important that the learner touch the cube, not the container. Touch the cube, not the container. I'm going to say it again. Touch the cube, not the container. The container isn't the preposition. You're actually teaching them that that cube is the preposition. And then later on, what's going to happen is you're going to replace the cube with other items, and then you're just going to randomize the item that would take the place of the cube, and it's still in front of the little Ziploc thing, and there's like a little fading procedure that I don't go into in this video, but this can be a very effective way of teaching prepositions to your learners, that even if they have had challenges in the past, if you've had challenges coming up with ways to teach this to them, this could potentially be a way in. Touch on top. Very good. Touch on top. Very, very good. Good. So we have on top in isolation. Next, I'll introduce in front in isolation. Touch in front. Touch in front. Nice work. Touch in front. Very good. That is in front. Excellent. So the next step will be to do SD2 in the presence of SD1, asking for SD2 only. Touch in front. Very nice. Touch in front. That is fantastic. Nice job. Touch in front. Excellent. So my next step is to work on top in the presence of in front, asking for on top only. Touch on top. Excellent. Touch on top. That's what I like to see. Very, very good. Touch on top. That is perfect working. Very, very good. Next, I'm going to randomize what I'm asking for, but keep the objects in the same position. So nothing's going to move. I'm just going to randomly ask for one target or the other. Touch on top. Very good. Touch in front. Nice working. That's in front. Touch in front. Excellent. Give me 5. Very good. Touch on top. Very good. Touch on top. That's right. That is on top. Touch on top. Now touch in front. Very, very good. So the learner is scoring about 90 to 100%. In static positions, we're not moving the stimuli on the table. We are only randomly asking for in front or on top. So next, we're going to do both, randomize the target and the position. Our learner is now ready for SD1 and SD2, randomizing the target and the positions. Touch in front. Very good. That's what I like to see. That's touching in front. Touch on top. Fantastic. Very good. Touch on top. That's very good working. Excellent touching on top. Touch in front. Very, very good. There we go. Ready? I like the way your hands are down. You're looking, you're listening, you're following instructions. Touch in front. Very, very good working. So now the learner achieves 90 to 100% independent correct responding, and then we're going to be ready to introduce our third preposition. So give it a shot. Use discrimination training. Okay. I don't know. I think that guy's pretty smart. So anyway, so that's just one way of making the teaching more salient, making an abstract concept more salient by using those Ziploc containers, a couple of blocks, and using discrimination training. Okay, and now what I was saying about the third preposition, so there's a couple of different ways to approach the third preposition or the third object or the third response when you're doing discrimination training. You can systematically run it through the same steps as the other steps, as the first two steps, or you can try doing it using process of elimination. Put the new response in the presence of the two previous responses, ask for the new response. If your learner is wrong, now you're not going to do this like more than like 3 or 4 or 5 times. If they're wrong, just say, hey, that was nice trying. Get that stuff off the table, do something else for a few minutes, put the stuff back on the table, right? And then you ask for, so you have the new response in the presence of the two previous responses, and you ask them to identify the new response. And if they do, the surprise of reinforcement should be a huge, um, something huge for your learner that will shave off a lot of teaching trials. Because it's like, oh, that's behind, because that's on top and that's in front. When I hear this word behind, it must be that one. So now you're differentially reinforcing the correct responding for the previous responses because because they're mastered. The learner doesn't need the maximum amount of reinforcement for those previously acquired responses. What they need is the maximum amount of reinforcement for the new response. And that's something that, maybe we could talk about on a different night, is actually how to properly employ differential reinforcement. Because I feel strongly that our kids absolutely are cued into the amount of reinforcement that they get. Whether it's social, whether it's edible, whether it's something to drink, whether it's the duration of being able to self-stimulate as a reinforcer for the absence of self-stimulation. So differential reinforcement is something that you absolutely want to use during the discrimination training, especially if you're checking for your learner learning through the process of elimination. I hear this word beside. I've never heard it before. Here's some new stimulus. I've never seen that before. What happens if I do that? There's an explosion of reinforcement. Oh, that must be the new response, right? And then the other two responses don't get as much. They still get like, yeah, that's good. There you go, buddy. Nice job. But, but when you touch the new one, all kinds of cool stuff happens. Okay. Now, before we go on to programs, the pronouns, I'm going to give you your next keyword. And what would be funny is if you can actually name the movie that I got this from. I don't know, maybe I'd send you something extra that we're not even talking about tonight. That might help with some of all of this stuff. So here's your next keyword to write down. Now remember, when you write down the keywords, you're going to send them to info@abaskills.com with your name, with your contact information, and your BCB certificate number. So remember, if you know the name of the movie, include the movie, and I'll send you something interesting, okay? So your next keyword is New England clam chowder. That's right. Your next keyword is New England clam chowder. And like I said, if you know what movie that password, that keyword comes from, tell me the name of the movie and I'll send you something cool. Okay. All right. Let's talk about pronouns. All right. Talk about some prerequisites. Receptive people identification and receptive body part identification, because you're going to do a lot of, touch my arm, touch your arm, touch my shoulder, touch your shoulder, touch my nose, touch your nose. So obviously, you don't want to have to be teaching those body parts while you're teaching pronouns, right? Because pronouns are hard enough, because there's going to be all kinds of reversal problems. I mean, look, think about what typically developing kids do. They reverse pronouns for years before they finally figure it out. Obviously, some just get it right away, but I'm just talking about like your average, typically developing kid. Like they're just making little pronoun errors for, quite some time before it's all straightened out. Now, while we're talking about typically developing kids, here's what I want you to do. If you're not really awesome at understanding or knowing or being really fluent on what typically developing kids do and what the stages of development are and what kind of language they're supposed to use at different ages, like you have to have a thorough understanding of typical development. This is just my opinion, not looking to offend anybody, but I'm just saying we need to have a thorough understanding of typical development, because we are teaching learners that have atypical development. And then we're putting them in a teaching arrangement that is an atypical teaching arrangement. And all the teaching just seems kind of like atypical sometimes, right? So if you know, here's my point, is that if you're looking for programming, you're not quite sure what to do next, and you're looking at these boxes and these charts and things that you bought online and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that stuff is great. But if you just know what typical kids do, it will give you a much better sense. Because then when you look at a kid and you interact with them and you spend time with them, like you're just going to, these little red flags, these little lights are going to start going off in your head. You're like, ah, this is where he has an excess. This is where there's a deficit. Here's another excess. That's an excess. There's a deficit. There's a deficit. And you start making some notes. And you do that before you start assembling your programming, because you want to understand, like, you're working with a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 2-year-old. What's a typical kid supposed to be doing at those ages? Now, language-wise, obviously, once kids get 3, 4, and 5, language gets very advanced. But that doesn't matter. Where does your kid fall? And again, I don't care about vocal language or using some kind of communication device. To me, it's all the same thing. Just because a kid uses a communication device doesn't mean they can't master all this stuff. If anything, it would theoretically may be easier because all the language is mapped out for them on their device. So it's really matching the sample, right? Certainly very complex navigating between screens, because navigation can be challenging. 2, 3, 4 screens you have to navigate, clear it, and then go back to the home page, etc. Anyway, let's get back to pronouns. So receptive people identification are your prerequisites. Receptive body part identification are the prerequisites. But that's why, before you just jump in with the pronouns, start going nuts, let's start with some pre-pronoun teaching, something that's nice and friendly. And why don't I just go back to where I was? Okay, let's see if I can do that. Here we go. Thank you. Pre-pronoun teaching. Receptive possessives. So your SD is touch the person's body part, clothing item, or item they are holding. And the learner touches the correct item. And you can use dolls, puppets, or if there are other people available in the house, in the classroom. Okay, so it's like, touch mom's shirt. Touch Julie's pants, right? So they have to know who the people are first, right? So that's why your prerequisite skill. Then your mastery isn't 90 to 100% independent correct responding across 3 consecutive sessions and 2 instructors and blah, or 5 yeses, or however many yeses that you want. No, when it comes to pronouns and prepositions and nothing is mastered until the learner has generalized to novel stimuli, novel people, etc. Like, it just has to be part of the repertoire. Otherwise, you keep teaching and teaching, and you do as much away from the table as possible, because there's only so much that you can do at the table that's going to transfer to real life, right? So the mastery is generalization to novel people. Once it's generalized, then you can start receptive pronouns, and you can also start expressive possessives. Now, when you're running this receptive possessives program, be sure to include the child's name as one of the SDs. All that time you spend teaching your learner, you show them a picture of themselves and you say, who's this? And you teach them to say, me. Okay, well, just before you go like crazy doing that, let's just make sure that when you say touch, let's just say Joey. Let's say your learner's name is Joey. Touch Joey's shirt. That Joey looks down at his shirt and he touches his shirt, because Joey, mommy, the teacher's name, the teaching assistant's name, the doll that's on the desk. You got Bert, you got Ernie. I don't know who you got, like Peppa Pig, right? Pinkalicious. It's all these things that that kids are into, these crazy kids and what they're into these days. Okay, be sure to include the child's name as one of the SDs. It's sometimes easier to just use dolls that have names, like Barbie, to increase the field size. This prevents having to gather many adults at the same time. But once your learner has generalized this step with people and dolls, generalize to photographs of people. And please be sure that the photos are of people that the learner can receptively identify, right? You can be teaching receptive people ID at the same time as pronouns, but but only use the people that are mastered from the receptive people identification program, okay? Thank you. Okay, so let's keep going. So here we go. Here's our handy dandy chart. We have receptive possessives. If any speech therapist ever watches this video, she's going to be like, she's going to be cringing. Okay, receptive possessives goes to expressive possessives. All right, and then receptive possessives also goes to receptive pronouns. So here are those two programs. In expressive possessives, your SD is whose body part or clothing item while touching the target item. And the learner has to label the correct item: mommy's nose, Billy's tummy, Bert's shirt. And the stimuli are the same as receptive possessives. So your prerequisites are receptive possessives and expressive body parts. And your mastery is generalization to novel stimuli, okay? Generalization to novel stimuli. Always set your mastery as generalized responding. That means you have to probe for generalization, which means you have to have untrained stimuli that you are specifically saving for your probe for generalization. If your learner demonstrates 90 to 100% on that probe for generalization, fantastic. Go on to the next step. If they don't, select a couple of more things to teach, but that means you're probably going to have to find other stimuli that you are going to isolate for the probe for generalization, okay? That's the tough part. Okay, and you can also be running receptive pronouns my and your. Now you should sit, I don't care how old your learner is, whether they're 18 years old or 18 months old. With an 18-month-old, you're probably sitting on the floor, but I don't think you'd be running pronouns with an 18-month-old. I'm just making a point. You have to be facing the learner. Like, don't sit next to a table and then your learner's looking at you, is looking this way and you're looking this way. Face the learner and say, touch your arm. And initially, try doing it without putting a lot of emphasis on the pronoun. Now, here's a huge mistake that people make and consider these responsive mastered, which is why when you're teaching pronouns, you have to video yourself doing it to make sure you're not making this mistake. Because everybody wants their learner to succeed. And we inadvertently stress the pronoun. So the proper SD delivery should be touch your arm. What you wind up saying is touch your arm. There's just a little more emphasis on your. And now it's fine to do that if it's a prompt, if you are using it intentionally as a prompt. If you video yourself running this program and you are overemphasizing the pronoun because you subconsciously want your learner to be successful, then stop it. Because you have to be able to just say, touch your arm, touch your shirt, touch my nose, touch my shoulder, stand up, sit down, clap your hands, touch your head, touch my knee, touch your shoe. And everything just has to just sound normal, right? But if you're so anyway, I think I made the point. Now, a fantastic prompt is putting emphasis on the pronoun. Touch your arm, touch my shirt, touch your head. And I want you to lean in like that too. You have, but you don't have to do that. I'm just kidding. But look, that's a great prompt to use, but only as a prompt. So now you have to get rid of that. You have to make sure that whomever is working with that learner is not putting emphasis on the pronoun forever. You got to fade that out. It's got to sound natural. Okay, let's keep going. So here's something interesting. Your prerequisites, body parts, prepositions, right? Receptive prepositions are the first prerequisite that you need to start pronouns. Now, again, receptive pronouns is a teach one and probe for generalization. So you shouldn't have to train, touch my shirt, touch your shirt, touch my knee, touch your knee, touch my shirt, touch your. Teach one, probe for generalization. 10, 15, 20, 30 other responses. Now, this is when I say teach one and probe for generalization. It actually means one response. So you've taught touch my shirt, touch your shirt. Great. Mastered. Probe for generalization. Your learner doesn't get 90 to 100% during the probe for generalization. Target one more response. Touch my shoulder, touch your shoulder. That's the next response to target. That gets interspersed with touch my shirt, touch your shirt, touch my shoulder, touch your shoulder. Okay, now you have the two responses that are mastered. Conduct another probe for generalization across 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 other responses. If your learner gets 90 to 100% during the probe for generalization, fantastic, go on to the next step. If not, pick one more response. And keep doing that until the learner is demonstrating generalized responding. You're going to save yourself a lot of time, because what you don't want is a learner that has 30 receptive pronouns mastered. My, your, shirt, shoes, chair, nose, teeth, lips, ears. That's ridiculous. Okay, next. Expressive possessives and receptive pronouns my and your go to expressive pronouns my and your. So your SD is whose body part or clothing item, while the instructor is holding either the learner's or her/his own body part. So you say, whose arm? The learner says your arm. And believe me, there's going to be all kinds of discrimination errors, all right? Expect it and just plan on fixing it. Again, that's why you have to use discrimination training. And you have to collect trial by trial data. And you have to display in a percentage correct format, because your percentage correct data and your data display are going to be more sensitive to small increases in your learner's acquisition of this particular skill than other forms of data collection. Learner says, your body part. The prerequisites: receptive pronouns, expressive possessives, mastery, generalization across body parts and clothing items. And at some point in this PowerPoint, I just abbreviate this to TOAPFG. Okay, just teach one and probe for generalization. Just keep doing that. You'll be surprised at how quickly your learner is learning. So, next step. Now, simultaneously, while you're doing expressive pronouns my and your, you can introduce receptive his and hers. Okay? So with receptive his and hers, you're going to present the SD, touch his or her body part. Learner touches the correct body part. Your stimuli are pictures or other people besides the teacher or the instructor. Now, don't get little pictures like this. Get pictures that are 8.5 by 11, and it should be like a body length or the torso up picture. Don't have it be your face, and you don't have to have hair and makeup done for the pictures. Okay, just get some pictures, print them out on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. Make them bigger if you want, because the goal is that the learner is going to look over, because the learner is still facing you, and now here's the desk or the table and chairs with the pictures on it, and you're going to say, touch her nose, and your learner is going to look over and discriminate his and hers, the boy versus the girl, because as you can see, one of the prerequisites is receptive gender identification. So you can't start this program until they've mastered receptive gender identification. So they're going to look over, see the girl's nose, touch it, contact reinforcement. Okay? Next, after expressive pronouns my and your, you do expressive you versus I. And here's what that program looks like. You say, who has the object or clothing or color clothing, with both learner and instructor holding an object. And your learner says, I or you have the object. Now again, doesn't matter, vocal language or augmented communication device. These responses need to be on there somewhere, okay? And if you need to do some pre-training with your kids that use augmentative communication devices, to show me I, show me you. And they can get there quickly, homepage, this one, that one, that one. And like, look, just my opinion, I think navigating 3 pages is plenty because they still have to clear the field and get back to the homepage even after that response. That's a lot of work. So if your kid has an augmented communication device, critical to train the fluency, going from page to page, clearing the field, going back to the homepage, okay? Stimulate common objects and toys, and your prerequisites are mine, your, and I have, right? So there are some programs that I'm mentioning as prerequisites that we're not covering tonight, but I'm hoping that you're familiar with them. And if not, just let me know. And I'm more than happy to send you the, you know, like exactly what you see here. This is how you do it. And then mastery is generalized responding. That's going to be it, like forever with this program. 90 to 100%, 3, 4, 5 consecutive Ys is not mastery. They have to be able to do it away from the table with different people in different locations. If they can't do that, then it's like they never learned it. They are not going to make these discriminations in real life, and they are not going to use pronouns appropriately in their everyday engagements with you. Okay, now a lot just happened, okay? So let's watch. So now we go from here to here. Intersperse all previously acquired. Now that step is critical. Now you might get stuck here for a while. That's fine. I totally expect it. How do we quantify a while? I don't know. You have to calculate your learner's rate of acquisition in order to determine what's going to be reasonable. When I run these programs and I know my learner's rate of acquisition, I double it for this kind of programming because all kinds of crazy abstract language stuff is going on, but and all kinds of crazy discriminations. But once I start interspersing all previously acquired, once I get through this first step, I feel very confident that every other box in the sequence that says intersperse all previously acquired is going to be easier. And you can measure how many trials, how many sessions, how long does it take my learner to master and generalize the interspersal of all previously acquired responses. So when you get to the next intersperse all previously acquired responses box, is it shorter? Is it longer? If it's longer, that's a problem. It should be equal to or less. Each time you hit one of these boxes that says intersperse all previously acquired, your learner should be acquiring at a rate that is the same as the previous interspersal box or faster, preferably faster. Okay, now, intersperse all previously acquired. Then you're gonna go to receptive hour, which is this, touch our body parts. The learner touches his body part and the instructor's body part simultaneously. Right? Touch our shoulders. Now, what did I just do? Emphasized our, but that was for your sake. That wasn't actually instructor error. So you know that the SD is actually touch our shoulders because the learner has to discriminate what you're saying and respond appropriately without the assistance of the inflection. And plus, nobody talks like that except us with our learners. Which is why sometimes when we're not around our learners, they don't do what we know that they can do. Oh, he does that during blah, blah, blah. But you know what, who cares? If he doesn't do it when we're not around, it's like they never learned it. So again, receptive hour, you just interspersed all previously acquired. Well, now you're gonna do it again. You're gonna intersperse all previously acquired again. You're gonna intersperse all of this stuff. Everything presented randomly. Touch, touch, touch his, hers, our, my, your, okay? You, I, just completely random, 90 to 100%, independent correct responding, generalized to multiple people, away from the table, dolls, people, this, that, the other. Anything you can think of. Better to spend more time focusing on looking at mastery and considering mastery as generalization than it is to just say it's master to move on to the next step and everything starts to fall apart and then you got to go back. It's happened to me before. I've made that mistake. I learned not to make that mistake. I've been doing this over 25 years now. So and I made that mistake enough times to know not to make that mistake anymore. All right, let's keep going. Now, from interspersing all the previously acquired, we go down to receptive there, right? Touch their body parts. So we just focused on our, and now we're going to focus on their. So now they have to touch other people's body parts. And they're going to, you are going to use those pictures, those 8.5 by 11 pictures again, okay? And so now, what's good about this program is you're not talking about anybody specifically, so you can use pictures of people that the child does not know. All right, you can just cut pictures out of magazines. You can, like, you know, scan stuff on your computer if you're doing everything remotely, and they're just going to click on there, touch their body parts, and generalize responding. I don't have to go into the whole generalized responding thing again, do I? Teach one, a probe for generalization. And then what are you going to do? Your favorite thing, your new favorite thing, which is intersperse all previously acquired, figure out and fix every discrimination error, and get to the point where your learner is responding in a generalized and novel manner. And man, how awesome are you, and how awesome is your learner that they acquired that skill? Good for you. All right, next. Here's what happened. A couple lines popped up. So here we go. Expressive pronouns, my and your, is a prerequisite of expressive. You have my, your, and this interspersal, previously acquired, is an prerequisite, is the prerequisite for you have my / your. So whose? Now you're going to introduce whose body part, clothing item do I have? And the child says, you have my or your body part. Again, mastery, generalized responding, teach one, probe for generalization, and just keep doing that. Just never stop doing that. There are some programs where you don't do that. Excuse me. But these programs, you do that. All right, next. So we got a couple of things going on here, right? So here we go. Down here. Intersperse all previously acquired. Another intersperse all previously acquired. That's my favorite thing. Expressive, you have my and your. So you're going to take all the receptive stuff, all the expressive stuff, and then intersperse all that stuff. Fix all the discrimination errors. There shouldn't be a whole lot at this point, but there are probably going to be some. Fix them, go on to the next step. Expressive, I have my, your. So whose arm do you have? Whose shirt? I have my, your item. Whose toy? Whose toy do you have? I have my toy. Hand him a different toy. Hand him your phone. Whose phone do you have? I have your phone. Okay, then what do we have to do? We can say it all together. Intersperse all previously acquired. Fix the discrimination errors and go on to the next step. Excellent. Next step. Expressive his and hers. Whose object? His or her object. Good. What's the next step? Intersperse all previously acquired. Okay? So it's a lot of work. I know. You're like looking at all that and you're like, wow, that could take forever. Well, it probably won't. But the end benefit is, like, think about the complexity and abstractness of the programming that we've talked about, and just the overall basic sequence: objects, colors, shapes, prepositions, then pronouns, and next we're just going to talk about opposites, which are a lot easier than you might think. For some kids, it's extremely difficult, but again, that's only because we're crappy at teaching it, not because the kid can't figure it out. All right. But anyway, that's it. Labels, colors, shapes, prepositions, pronouns, opposites. Pretty basic sequence. So if you get your kid through all of that stuff, I feel confident saying they're going to be ready for WH discrimination, which is a critical cornerstone program when it's at the advanced level in relation to conversational language training. All right. WH discrimination is a cornerstone program that if your learner can master and generalize WH discrimination at a basic through advanced level, then conversation training will probably, might be, maybe easier than it otherwise would have been, and maybe may sound a lot more natural. And you probably won't have to go through all the steps that I would outline for a conversational language programming track. So anyway, let's keep going. So here are our last 3 programs. I just didn't put them into little boxes, but I'm sure you can picture what it would look like if it was in a little box. So you have he or she. Who has the object? He or she has the object. What do you think the next step is? Intersperse all previously acquired. Yes, that's right. Then after that is generalize. Then you start their and our. And your SD is whose body part? Their or our body parts. Now your prerequisites are your, my, and plurals, okay? Plurals isn't as hard to teach as you might think, and maybe I'll have to cover that on a different night, but I just want to make sure that that you know that if you have not taught plurals, again, feel free, email me, and I'll just send you like a little write-up like this. It's not that challenging. For some kids, intersperse all previously acquired. Again, last, we, they, and no one. Who has objects? We have objects. They have objects. No one has the objects. And no one is really difficult to teach because it's the absence of something in the environment. Now, I haven't worked with a whole lot of kids that mastered and generalized no one. I've had a few kids master it, generalizing it. It's like sometimes they just need like constant reminders, right? Constant reminders. Oh, that's no one. So who has it? No one has it. Do you see anyone? Do I have the toy? No. Do you have the toy? No. Does Sarah have the toy? No. Who has the toy? No one has the toy. Who has the toy? No one has the toy. Okay, all right, just checking, just making sure. Keep that in mind. Okay, so there are your pronouns. Now, we're gonna talk about opposites. Just before we get started with opposites, I want you guys to think about stimuli. So when I was doing a lot of one-to-one instruction, I was constantly collecting stimuli, reinforcers, going to like if I was, and I used to go I drive anywhere to work with any kid. I just loved working with kids. It was, seeing the progress, getting them talking, and working with some really, really, really super smart people. It was fantastic. So when I was in a different town, I come across like a dollar store. I would stop either before or after my session and get, 4, 5, 6 things. And because you never know. But one thing that I would always look for are stimuli for opposites. Because here's what's critical about teaching your first few opposites is that the stimuli that you're using have to be identical aside from the opposite that you're teaching. So obviously big and small / little is the easiest because you can find like the big tube of toothpaste and the travel size toothpaste, which they look exactly the same, they just differ in size. You can get the giant Coke bottle and now you can get the little Coke bottle. They look exactly the same, they only differ in their size. But anything else that you find that could be used as an opposite, just buy it. Like, I'll give you an example. I was in one of these dollar stores, and there were kids' shoes, and I was just like looking at them, like, what could I do with kids' shoes? I'm like, I know what I could do. I'm gonna get the kids' shoes. I'm going to take a little Ziploc bag and fill it with sand, and put that Ziploc bag in one shoe, and then cover it with a black piece of paper. And then I'm going to take the other shoe, get a Ziploc bag, blow some air into it, close it, stick it in the shoe, cover it with black paper. So it looked like two identical shoes. The difference is one was heavy and one was light. And so I was like, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to see. So like, that's the kind of stuff that I want you thinking about when you're out there. Well, when you're out there. If you get back out there anytime in the next couple of years, that's what you should be doing. You know, but even like any like website, because I like still do it sometimes, or some of the kids that I'm working with doing remote learning. If I'm on one of these websites, I will just purchase stuff, send it to the parents, or I'll just send a link to the parents and I'll say, here's my idea for this stuff. I want to try X, Y, and Z with these things. Because I like the exchange of ideas, and it just gets everybody thinking about more than just picture cards, right? Because picture cards get boring. There are some kids, I mean, whatever, you know, like you see the same set of like picture cards for like, you know, 2, 5, 10 years. Like it's, yeah, stuff has to change. So we as therapists, as instructors, as teachers, behavior analysts, you know, all that, like we have to be more aware of the stimuli. So when you're thinking about that, find stuff for opposites, because it's not easy. Okay, let's look at our opposites chart. So it says what opposites to teach. So again, like I was saying when we first started, so the programming that I'm showing you tonight is pretty much from the LOVAS curriculum. So here's some of the opposites. So big, small, and little. So how do you teach big, small, and little? Well, you teach big and small, and then you teach big and little, or you teach big and little, and then you teach big and small, or you teach big and small and generalize it to little, or you teach big and little and generalize it to small. Or some people just teach big versus little, and they don't teach small at all. My preference is to do big versus little, and then just generalize to the word small, because I think little is just something more common. So big and little, which would then be followed by high and low, long and short, tall and short, fat and skinny, up and down, wet and dry, open, closed, empty, full, rough and smooth, soft and hard, light and dark, hot and cold, off and on, grown up versus kid, good versus gross, nice versus mean. And then we have the expressive components, which are, you know, adding the ER endings, bigger and smaller, higher and lower, longer and shorter, and then the ER endings to the other opposites. And then this SD, what's opposite? So what's the opposite of big? What's the opposite of high? What's the opposite of near? What's the opposite of short? Right? So your learners should be able to answer those discriminations. And of course, an additional discrimination would be doing the mixed opposites, where you say, you know, touch something that's, you know, that's little and heavy. And so the child has to manipulate some of the objects, and they have to hand you the one that's little and heavy. But that's a basic list of opposites that I would teach. And this is pretty much the sequence that I would teach them in. I think that there's something about the sequence it's little systematic in how abstract. Here, I'll just stop scrolling up and down and go back to big and little, and then high and low. Because now you're like, oh, how am I going to teach high and low? Well, you can actually sit the kid on the floor, put something on the top of the desk, put something under the desk, right? And you can say, you know, where's the one that's high? Where's the one that's low? Or you can put it high up on a shelf and then put something down on a chair. So it's like, so visually, the discrimination is there. Long and short, again, nice visual discrimination. Tall and short, visual discrimination. Fat and skinny, visual discrimination. Up and down, visual. Wet versus dry, textual. Now, there have been a couple of learners that I've worked with that had to start with wet versus dry. All those other opposites couldn't figure out how to teach them so that they made sense to that particular learner or those learners. But when we started with wet and dry, or hot versus cold, where you can take something and put it in the microwave for a few seconds, and then take something out of the freezer that looks exactly the same, and then have them hold it, and you say, give me hot. And I mean, obviously you're not going to scald your learner, so let's make sure that is just warm. But that's why the thing that's cold should be coming out of the fridge or the freezer, so that they can feel the difference. They have their first opposite may be tactile instead of visual. Open and close can be a fun game that you can make with slamming doors, and I know all parents and teachers love that. So empty, full, again, a visual discrimination. Rough and smooth, your tactile discrimination, soft and hard, tactile, light and dark, visual, hot and cold, tactile, etc. So this is something that, that you're definitely going to have to use visual stimuli that are identical, that only differ by the opposite that you are trying to teach. Otherwise, you run the risk of over-selection. And if you're not familiar with the term over-selection, it means that your learner is focusing in on an irrelevant part of the stimuli. So if you're trying to do big and little, and you're doing a big crest tube versus a little crest tube of toothpaste, but they don't look the same because one might have like a stamp on it and the other one does not have a stamp. And then when you say little and the little one is the stamp, and the learner knows, well, I'm looking at the stamp, the one with the stamp is little. But then when you try to generalize to other stimuli, instead of looking at the size of the items because they're identical, your learner's going to look for a stamp. The stamp's not there. Now it's going to happen. Lots of discrimination errors. And then you're going to be like, oh, this went beautifully with the tubes of toothpaste. Like, yeah, but you selected stimuli that forced your learner to engage in some other behavior, to cue into something else, okay? So not actually the size. So again, I can't say it enough. Select the stimuli that are identical with the exception of the opposite pair that you are going to be teaching initially. When you're probing for generalization, that's when you can start mixing the stimuli. Now, I also have this generalization chart that I'm happy to send to you because it gives like a nice list of big and little, long and short, empty, full, hot and cold, heavy, light, open, closed, wet and dry, clean and dirty, old and new, tall and short, fast and slow, and high and low, rough and hard. I'm sorry, soft, hard, smooth, and rough. And you can add more on there, but it's good to just keep like these kind of data, because you want to make sure that you're not only getting generalized responding, you want to make sure that your learner is retaining some of those generalized responses as well. And sometimes I'm going to keep that all on a sheet like this, right? Because I want to see like what's not generalized, what is generalized, what is novel stimuli, what's only under the control of the training stimuli. All right, because this can get a little funky if you're not keeping very, very, very good data. So that's a good sheet to have, and I'm happy to send that to you. Okay, now with some of the receptive steps, I want you to do what's called switching the referent point. Like with big and little, that just means that what's big in one trial is little in the next, which means when you're doing that, you are not presenting identical stimuli. Again, let's use the crest tubes of toothpaste. You have the big crest tube and the little crest tube, and you tell your learner, touch little. I'm sorry, let me use a better example. Touch big. Touches the big tube of toothpaste. Great. So now you get a cereal box, and you take the little tube of toothpaste off. You put the big cereal box there next to what was the big tube of toothpaste, but now you say touch big, and the answer is cereal box. And touch little, and now what was big in the last trial is now little, which is the tube of toothpaste. That's called switching the referent point. And you have to do that. You have to do that during teaching and when you're probing for generalization as well. Okay? Because later on, something we're not talking about is big versus bigger versus biggest, right? Small versus smaller versus smallest. But if you can't switch the referent point, if your learner isn't switching the referent point, I feel confident saying your learner is not going to be able to do that other more difficult discrimination of big, bigger, and biggest. Now, expressively, again, switching the referent point where applicable. Now, when you're doing manding or conversation training and you're using comparatives, like I'm talking about big, bigger, and biggest, those are things that you should correct in the moment. If you are, like, let's say you're trying to teach them doing like natural environment teaching or some form of incidental teaching, the absolute second that your learner uses the incorrect response, immediately say what the correct response is. Almost at the same time, so you're stepping on what they're saying so that they hear it and they go, and they self-correct. Self-correcting is exactly what you're looking for. You don't want to have to go back and reset the stimuli and start a whole other trial because you're probably in the midst of something that's a little more naturally occurring. If your child is using an augmentative communication device, as soon as they hit the wrong button and you hear the wrong response come out of the device, you model the response on the device for your learner and then ask them to do it again. Or just model it and then go on to something else. Because sometimes, you don't have to always, like not every single time you have to model it and try to transfer that control. So the critical elements of opposites. 1, find stimuli that are identical with the exception of the opposite pair that you're teaching. 2, switch the referent point. 3, make sure that the responding is generalized, not only at the table, but with everything. So I don't want to glance over that, but I mean, I've said it 1,000 times, is that component of working away from the table and getting the kids to generalize what you've taught them outside of the teaching arrangement is so critical with these abstract language programs, because if they don't, they absolutely will not ever use them away from the table. And on the rare occasion that they might, you're probably not going to notice, and it's going to just like go right by you, or go right by a parent, or go right by a teacher or a teaching assistant. It's not going to contact reinforcement, and it's going to fall by the wayside. So that's why you have to have those charts, those generalization charts. Track what's being targeted for generalization. It's one of the only programs that I ever do that in, but I really want to know, because those opposite pairs are so critical to descriptive and conversational language. Remember what we were talking about with that preposition expansion, and we get to the attribute object preposition, the location step. You want to be able to use more than big and little in that kind of program. And you want to be able to say, where's the big car? It's under the table. Well, where else is the big car? Oh, it's next to the little block, right? You want, like, those words have to mean something, and they can't just mean it at the table. They have to mean something away from the table. Okay, let's finish up. You guys have been a great audience. Okay, just a reminder, if you're getting CEUs, please send the keywords via email with your name and BACB certificate number to info@ABAskills.com. We'll then send the certificate, PowerPoint, and your hands out. And please go to ABAskills YouTube page for additional CEU workshops. And you can like, and you can share, and you can subscribe, and I think that would just be amazing. Now, you need your last keyword, okay? Your last keyword is misanthrope. That's right, misanthrope, MISANTHROPE, okay? Those are your 3 keywords. Send them in an email to info@ABAskills.com, and we will send you your certificate, PowerPoint, and hands out. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at this email address, and I'll be happy to troubleshoot, brainstorm, anything that you want to discuss. Thanks again. Have a great
Ray, we have a lot of questions.
Oh.
You did amazing. This is such a great workshop. Thank you so much. This is awesome. So I just want you to know that a bunch of things came in to the Facebook comment section, and I got some private messages as well.
Okay.
Okay. So, so let me just start from, when do you teach touch preposition versus put preposition? And how would you make that programming decision?
So if your learner okay, so there's two things. One is sometimes we talk about learners as being auditory learners versus visual learners. So if I think that for a very specific reason, sometimes visual stimuli are just easier to bring under instructional control, right? Are just easier to establish stimulus control than auditory stimuli. And if you try the standard version first and you give it a good try, like let's say that you try for like 2 weeks and your learner is not making any progress, just go right to the visual format, because why not? Why wait? So there's no like critical point where you're going to say, we need to switch to the visual format with the Ziploc containers and the blocks. I think that we've tried this, put preposition thing for a couple of weeks. I feel like our teaching procedure is not being effective, so we can, mess around with a bunch of different things, or we can go right to the visual format, knowing that we're going to be transferring that visual format to a purely auditory format later on.
Okay. And actually, that's a great jumping off point for the next question. When you're talking about transferring back, so you're saying you would do touch preposition and then transfer over to put preposition. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's also a question about transfer procedure for the expressive portion. So would you say that you typically teach all of the opposites receptively and then move into the expressive component? Or do you say you teach receptive big little and then do expressive big little, receptive, high-low, expressive high-low, that way?
Okay. So kind of like the charts that I showed you tonight, there's usually like a receptive step. So if I did receptive big and little and then started expressive big and little, and at the same time I'm starting expressive big and little, I might start receptive high low, right? So I always want to keep that programming moving. I don't want to wait for something to be mastered. I know what the prerequisite skills are, and as soon as the prerequisites are in place, I'm going to go on to that other program. So so I hope that answers the question, but the rest of the answer to that question is you have to look at your learner's overall program, because some kids that I've consulted with where I'm not the supervisor, I've seen like kids are only getting 10, 15 hours a week, but they have 25 programs. So there is room for more than one opposite pair program. But then there are other kids that might be getting more hours that have fewer programs, and you have time in the program. Now, the other way to really figure that out is by calculating the rate of acquisition, because you can introduce multiple opposite pairs simultaneously, calculate the rate of acquisition in the other programs within the same skill domain, and then if the mastery is taking longer, is far exceeding what that rate of acquisition is, then you know you're doing too many opposite pair programs. Then take one out and measure the rate of acquisition over the next month or so. And like, again, it should be as fast or faster than the other programs that fall within the same skill domain. Does that make sense, Marcia? Did I answer the question?
Yes, I think that's a really important point about rate of acquisition. I think that's something that isn't calculated often enough in programming, right? And so I think that's a really good point. And the other question was about the prerequisite skills that you're mentioning regarding like labels and shapes and colors, etc. Are you saying that you would ask a factual question about an item, such as like, is this a circle or a square, or is this a circle, versus what shape is it?
If the
Because there's a concern was raised about it being a factual yes/no question.
yes, it is a factual yes/no question. And if your learner has is working on or has mastered factual yes/no, then yes, I would throw that in there. I would say, is this red? And hopefully they would respond appropriately. Because again, what's the worst case scenario? So if you're working on factual yes/no, and you introduce that kind of SD into the colors program, what's the worst thing that happens? Your learner makes an error, you error correct, give them an opportunity to respond independently, they get it correct. Now you make a note that you actually tried that not yet mastered, but on its way to mastery SD, and your learner responded incorrectly. If they respond incorrectly 3, 4, 5 times, no more than 5, then I would not run that SD in the color program. But I do like doing that sometimes. Depending on the learner, I may take something that's close to mastery from one program, and if I can apply a similar kind of SD in a different program so that all the programming like really is like relative and fits together that way, then I will definitely try that.
Okay, great. So another question kind of about that transfer from receptive to expressive, also about opposites. So, well, before I ask that, so do you, like, let's say you were meeting a student for the first time and you're doing your assessments and those things, and you say, okay, I'm going to put in some receptive prepositions. Would you then immediately use a transfer to expressive, so touch big, and then asking, what size is it, or prepositions rather? So would you say touch on or touch in front? Where is it? Do you usually weave those together right away, or do you usually just do all the receptive first, or is it just too individualized?
Okay, so now Marcia, that I that like the programming that like I do is probably a little bit different and probably a little unconventional, because like I was saying during the presentation, I want to give my learner the benefit of the doubt that they are going to be able to reach a higher bar. Like I always set the bar super high. So I might, and I don't care if the learner can talk or if they're using a device, I might just say, put on top, where is it? Just to see what happens. Like we might just collect data on that for a couple of weeks, because again, the worst case scenario is we say, you know what, we tried it. This expressive component, this expressive transfer is just a little too challenging. I don't like this teaching procedure. We're going to pull this out. We're going to teach it separately, and then we're going to systematically intersperse these SDs. So there's no hard and fast answer other than I would try it, because you never know. And the beauty of what we do is we're collecting the data and we're figuring those things out.
Okay, great. And with the receptive put preposition, do you typically use touch preposition as a supportive component to that, or do you automatically use touch preposition?
Okay, no, that's a really, really good question. I really don't have like a standard way of doing things. Like I look at my learner's learning history, and like I was saying, it's not so much about, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use these little these boxes and these cubes, and I'm going to transfer them to this receptive or expressive step, and that's the way I'm going to do it. I look at the learner's history, and I look at my notes on that learner and the discrimination errors that I've had to fix in the past. And so before I introduce a program like receptive prepositions using the put or using the touch, I again, look at the learning history, look at the errors that we've previously fixed, and I make a determination which one should we start with, which is going to be the highest probability technique or strategy to facilitate the acquisition of this concept. And again, we'll do it, collect the data. If it doesn't work, then we'll do something else, or we'll do some combination of the two. So I think that's the answer. Is 1 is the learner's learning history. 2, what are my personal notes on how that learner learns? And then 3, making my best estimation as what's the highest probability teaching procedure to facilitate the acquisition of the response.
Great. I got a couple more. We got a lot of engagement today, so that was really, really great. I just want to comment on that I typically will start with put prep and use touch prep as a supportive component if I feel like that mixed presentation is necessary for a deeper conceptual learning. Because I think that if the learner can put prep and that can generalize all over the place with anybody, that's going to be what's naturally occurring in the environment. So I typically don't put touch prep like as an immediate thing that I use. That's just my own personal programming way.
That makes sense. Sure.
But I think I've done touch prep many times, and I think it's been extraordinarily helpful when someone has been struggling with that discrimination. It's a lower response effort. It leaves the stimuli set for them to visually look at rather than to manipulate. So it's a really, really helpful tool that I think a lot of programmers don't usually utilize. I think it's a really, really, and your YouTube videos that, they can go to YouTube and see the ABAskills channel and just review that is really very clear and very, very helpful. So for opposites,
yes,
at what point do you move on to what's the opposite of? That was a question that I got.
Yeah.
And also to follow up with that, do you teach your opposites in a field of 2 or a field of 3 with a distractor item?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so let me answer that question first. So I always start with a field of 2. And I know we have the whole 50-50 thing, but that's why as quickly as possible, I try to move from the identical stimuli to non-identical stimuli and switching the referent point. Because then obviously that doesn't completely eliminate the 50-50 because you have to run. So something that we didn't talk about is kind of like a lateral program, which is like an expansion where you use larger field sizes, but the expansion is in the SD because now you have to have like the big toothpaste, the little toothpaste, the big cereal, the little cereal, and you say touch big cereal.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but I wouldn't do that until I've actually mastered those things separately and use that description. So SD1. So if you look at SD1 versus SD2, SD1 is the big and little toothpaste, and SD2 is the big and little cereal. And then interspersing them would occur during the next 5 steps in that discrimination training procedure. Now, what was the first question?
Let me go back. So the first question was, when do you move on to what's the opposite of?
Oh, okay. Usually when I have about 5 mastered opposites, I start what's the opposite of. I just use that as a guideline. 5. It's somewhat random, somewhat arbitrary, but I find that like that seems to be a good place to start doing that because things are also getting mastered while we're practicing that and we're adding more.
Right. So you have a bunch of receptive opposite pairs rolling. And you can, at that point, like after 5, you've got a pretty good handle on the rate of acquisition.
Yes.
And you can see, all right, I can expect that all of my opposites outside of, say, oftentimes there's one or two opposite pairs that get tricky and take a little longer. But outside of that, all right, we can expect to have this receptive component kind of finishing up, at this point, because you're looking at that rate of acquisition. Awesome.
Right.
Okay, so just a couple more.
Sure.
I did remind everybody that if they have any questions that, I didn't ask or that they forgot to ask, that they can email you at ray@abaskills.com.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
And that if they didn't hear the video or missed a portion of the video, it'll be available on the ABAskills Facebook page. And once I get the recording all downloaded, we'll be putting it on the YouTube channel for ABAskills as well.
Great.
So they can go back and review things there. On that note, we will not be repeating any of the keywords now in live time, because that is part of our remaining, really fair, that only the people who were here for the entire portion can get the CEUs. And if they missed any portions, they can feel free to go back through the recording and rewatch those portions where they missed. Because if we were to just give them out now all at the end, then that's not fair for the people who were here the entire time and writing them down as they came in.
Right.
Okay. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss any of these questions. Oh, about the documents. So, if somebody wanted a copy of your slides or any of these other supporting documents that you shared today, will they just go to abaskills.com and register for the event?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll make sure that we remind everyone that if they want a copy of the materials, that they should go and register for the event. Okay. Now on the first stage of prepositions programming, there's a question that says, wouldn't Receptive be IDing which one is under, next to, whatever the preposition is, in a field of 3 rather than the in vivo action of placing the object in that position? Okay, I think we covered that one, because
Right.
it was asked 2 different ways. But yes, so we would be talking about placing the item preposition in a field on the table.
Right.
And then you talked a lot about, make sure that you're quickly getting into the environment away from the table. And also, I would add to that and say, make sure that anybody can tell them anywhere, anytime, with any object.
Right.
It's like, go put your bowl on the counter, go put your bowl in the sink, are totally different opportunities to test those prepositions and those discrimination skills. Okay. And I think, I'm making sure I don't have anyone else kind of coming in at the last minute, but I think I did ask all of the ones that we got today. There was a lot of engagement. A lot of people were really enjoying the video. Lots of people commenting and private messaging me with their questions. So great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great night.
Bye-bye.